People often go about their daily business, be they king or just ordinary people in the street, whoever. Well, often what can happen to a lot of people is they're simply going about their daily lives. But with this, the sin is often becoming more and more manifest, let's say. And suddenly, quite out of the blue, there's this intervention, but not coming from the this realm, but coming from another realm. Now, these interveners, you might say, that have a way of crossing from that dimension to this dimension. Either they come in person, or even they even materialize. Come in person would be you're aware that this person, let's say, be they angel or other, is manifest, or you're aware of a form of a voice, though you don't hear a voice with your ears. It's not necessarily an audible voice speaking to your heart, speaking to your mind. And you may, in a sense, let's say, know they're over there, or over out there, or you can't quite place where they might be stood. Maybe they're hovering, let's say. And you do picture they're more in the sense that they're hovering rather than they are standing. But others have seen them standing, in that they are more manifest. Now, manifest in that you see with your eyes. You even, on occasions, you get people hear with their ears, but usually there's no audible voice. And the sense is that there's a cross from the spirit world into this world. There's an intervention. And with this, what is manifest really is the presence that they operate in and through. Now, it's interesting these days that you hear so many stories, and some of them are just stories, but even you hear or you get news of over even nuclear military installations and such. There's been some kind of intervention that they've seen what you might call a sphere of light travelling faster than the speed of sound, and able to turn corners faster than any craft on Earth. So there's that, and that of course is interesting because the subject of conversation here is what you might call the Watchers. Now, let's say Watchers is a word. Now, you're talking about other people's personalities, people's. The word angel doesn't always sum up the right pictures in people's minds, because they usually think in the fairy tale sense when you think of an angel, but they are, let's say, messengers. Now, when you look at the accounts of what you might call the Watchers, those that are watching over the affairs of men, those who, let's say, their objective really is to keep things under wraps, let's say. Sin is often running rampant, either it's in a person's life or it's in the life of a king. And of course, with Pilate, this was interesting because Pilate's wife had a what you might call a visitation of sorts, in that she had a dream, and in that dream she was warned. She was warned to actually warn her husband to have nothing to do with that just man. Well, sin was very much manifest with Jesus. They were going to have him executed, and so Pilate was there presiding over the death or not of Jesus, and his wife having some kind of what you might call a cross from that dimension into this dimension, with this coming to her as a dream. So they can speak to you, let's say, in your mind through a dream, or they can speak to you as in a form of a voice, though you don't hear the words. You would know what they're saying purely by the strength of feeling. You know what they're let's say talking about. What's manifest is often the case of the indignation, even because sin is on the table, and they, in this same sense, would be pointing to the sin and saying, you know, you don't want to do that. You don't want to go that far with this because this is getting out of hand. This needs to be stopped. So it comes as a form of a warning, as it did to Pilate's wife. Well, there are many accounts in the Bible of such things, and on one occasion it calls them watchers. And you might say on other occasions they are indeed watchers, but it doesn't use the word watchers. Watchers would be they clearly are like God's cops, in that they are watching over the affairs of man. And when you read stories, let's say they could be just stories, you don't know, of over even military installations, they've seen, let's say, dots or spheres in the skies. And these spheres moving faster than the speed of sound and able to turn corners, which any other craft on Earth, should it turn a corner at such speed, it would just simply disintegrate in the skies, because it couldn't simply turn that fast. It has to turn in a more curved manner at such speed over a great distance to meet such a turning, and to eventually turn would take minutes of time. So they can turn, you read of these, and they turn suddenly, just like that. So they're clearly, they appear to have been tracked by radar. So you think, well, maybe they're hovering in a sense, kind of crossing from one dimension to another. They can clearly hang in between, let's say, you wonder sometimes. They can clearly affect matter here, in that they can manifest, in that they can be solid, let's say, solid to touch. They can even eat if they choose. And there are accounts of the same in the scriptures. So, but let's go with let's get this phlegm out of my lungs and my throat. Maybe I can speak more clearly. A glass of water, a cup of water, a steel cup of water, stainless steel cup of water might have. So let's go with that in mind. The watchers, God's cops. Many have committed crimes on this earth, and the police, really the powers that be, are ordained of God, because the police are, in a sense, though the police aren't always necessarily good people, they are God's appointed. The powers that be are ordained of God. There is no power but of God. It's let every soul be subject to the high power. So God sets these governments up, or allows these governments to come into power on earth to keep some sort of order. If there wasn't these cops on earth, physical cops, then sin would run rampant. Let's face it, whether you're anti law and order or whether you're pro law and order, you have to draw the line somewhere, and there has to be law and order. And it so happens the powers that be are ordained of God, and so God allows these various powers to come to power to keep some kind of order, or sin would run rampant. So you have these cops on earth. And these are really unwitting. Very often the case, they're unwitting. I mean, even with the police, you hear sometimes they'll ask a medium to help them find so and such. I guess even the police are sometimes aware of some kind of some kind of, let's say, what they might call force. And of course, there would be, there are, in fact, gods, the watchers being the ones, even over the police, the powers that be ordained of God. There is no power of God, but over these powers are what you might call watchers. So if you're thinking of committing a crime, bear in mind it's not just the police you've got to watch out for. It's God's watchers. God's watchers are watching. They can pass through walls and watch what's going on in there, and they would know what's going on. It's only it has to be a word in the ear of the good police officer, and the police car would soon turn up to arrest you. It should. Your sins be running so rampant that God has finally decided to bring out the watchers, in fact, are the ones who bring down the axe upon the tree. So these watchers have power to even execute judgment. They are like God's cops that are sent to arrest the criminal, and of course then the criminal is judged for his sins. He might find himself in prison. Now, there are all kinds of prisons on this earth. You might think, oh, a prison locked up in a cell, etc. But there are actually prisons of the mind in that you can be sent what's called a strong delusion. Now, a strong delusion is dangerous because you can't predict how long you're going to be in that prison, captive to your this strong delusion. The strong delusion is that you would believe a lie. Now, if you believe a lie, then you are clearly insane. Because it's like there's the bullseye. Insane people are simply illogical people in that they don't quite shoot the ball, let's say. Typically the goal is over there. Why are you shooting the ball into the sideline when you should be shooting, kicking the ball towards the goal? And so such a person would be under a strong delusion. So that actually is another one of the prisons that a person can find themselves in. People fear being locked up in a cell, but how would you like to go under a strong delusion? Well, my words, of course, so saying, but let's go into the watchers and how they operate. They might not always be called watchers, but clearly, if there's an angel that is watching over the affairs of man, or if not men, or if not one man, if not a few men, have no illusions. These watchers don't just operate at the top. They can operate from the top to bottom. They could be watching over you. So let's go with Nebuchadnezzar. And we haven't got long because people haven't got long, and it's already 30 minutes in. Let's go with Nebuchadnezzar. He's given an account of, it's kind of like his testimony, really, of how these watchers, let's say, intervened with him. Nebuchadnezzar the king. So in chapter 4, Daniel. Unto all the people, nations, languages that dwell in all the earth. So this is his account of what happened to him regarding these watchers, and this was all made manifest in largely in a dream. So peace be multiplied, he says, unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God have wrought toward me. So this is what happened to him. His, let's say, dealings with the watchers, God's cops watching over the affairs of man, God's cops watching over this king, and God's cops even given the power to execute judgment. But first they give a warning. So they're kind of said to keep things under wraps, otherwise sin would run rampant. So how it goes on, how great are the signs and how mighty are the wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. So he's going to This is his testimony. So he's writing to all languages and peoples and king unto all the nations. So he's hoping that all the nations are there. This is the king, a very powerful king, the king of Babylon, a great world empire. So I, Nebuchadnezzar, verse 4, was at rest in mine house and flourishing in my palace. Well, he's flourishing, but there's sin here, as is usually the case with these kings. They get so big and powerful. So let's imagine even a king should hear this tiny little YouTube or what's going to go into BitChute as well as YouTube. Well, should you be in a position of authority and power, then Nebuchadnezzar here is talking to both you and me. So I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house and flourishing in my palace. I saw in a dream which made me afraid. Now he's afraid because I guess the mood of the dream is coming to him as a warning. And the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. So you'd say here, the mood of the dream was really, in his case, quite made him feel insecure, let's say. Therefore made I a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. But of course none could, but there was one who could, and this was Daniel. And I'm not going to go into the whole thing. So, so verse 10, let's say, thus, this is the dream. So God has sent him a dream. This is all coming in via the watchers. So the watchers here, you would say, appear to be able to appear in people's dreams. So you go to sleep at night, and who should show up? These angels actually often show up while people are asleep. I guess while people are asleep, they can have your full attention. And that is perhaps, let's say, one reason why they appear in a dream. Because clearly when your head is upon the pillow and the room is silent, they have your full attention. And so they simply jump into your mind and explain all this via a dream, which is called a vision. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falleth upon men, then he, God, right, openeth the ears of man and sealeth his instruction. Wow. Nebuchadnezzar's instructions were sealed here via a dream. And of course, this dream was a bit of a mystery to him. So he needed Daniel. He asked all of his own magicians and seers and what have you to interpret the dream to him. But none could but Daniel. And of course, Daniel's operating under the one true God. And this dream, of course, comes from God. Therefore, this dream could only be interpreted via a man of God. So clearly in Nebuchadnezzar's mind, the dream had come from the one true God, seeing that the only one who could interpret the dream to him was indeed a prophet of God who understood dreams, who could indeed interpret dreams, who indeed had God's ear and God's mouth, and God would reveal to him what this was all about. Thus were the visions of mine head in my bed, verse 10 of chapter 4, in my bed. I saw, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all the beasts of the field. For all the beasts of the field had shadow under it. And the fowls of the heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all the flesh fed of it. So it's kind of symbolic of Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, and it's not just a small kingdom. You're looking at a world empire. Therefore you can see the symbolism of the dream, that this great big tree. I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher. Now here's the watcher. And an Holy One came down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, hew down the tree and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves and scatter his fruit. Let the beasts get away from under it and the fowls from his branches. So nevertheless leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with the band of iron and brass and the tender grass of the field. And let it be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts of the grass of the earth. So here's the dream that comes to Nebuchadnezzar, and it's got that kind of mood to it, in that it's a warning. And so the mood of the dream sings, Nebuchadnezzar wakes up and he's afraid. So he gets all of these magicians in. Eventually in comes Daniel, God's prophet, and Daniel interprets the dream to him, which is in, let's say, verse 17. And he's going to go on to talk about how this matter is by the decree of the watchers, so God's cops. God's cops have been watching over all of these things, and God's cops are no doubt watching over the kingdom of Babylon at the time, Nebuchadnezzar being the great king over this great world empire of Babylon. And he'd become proud and haughty and was oppressing the poor, no doubt, as it turned out. So Daniel simply interprets the dream. This matter, verse 17, this matter is by the decree of the watchers. So here they are, the watchers. And the demand by the holy ones, right? So God's cops, you might say, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. So the powers that be are ordained of God, and even sets up over it, over this kingdom here, over this world here, the basis of men. But sometimes these bases of men, the sin starts running rampant even in their own lives. And if this is manifest in the great kingdom that they're ruling and presiding over, then how great would that sin be? And how great would be the suffering that they could bring to so many people. So all of these kings on earth should take note from this story here, this testimony here of Nebuchadnezzar, in that beware, if your sin starts running rampant, don't be surprised if you're suddenly there's an intervention across from that spirit world into this world. And in this same sense, a watcher would come in with a symbolic axe to cut down your tree, to cut you down. So the matter is by the decree of the watchers, and demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and give it to whomsoever he will. And he setteth up over it even the basis of men. The dream, this dream, I King Nebuchadnezzar have seen now. And whereas, Daniel intervenes, and we're going to go to verse 23 here. So at first Daniel, whose name is Belshazzar, was astonished for 1 hour, right? This is verse 19 first. And his thoughts troubled him, and so he praised to God, no doubt. The king spake and said, Belshazzar, let not the dream, the interpretation thereof trouble thee. Belshazzar answered, said, My lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. So the powers that be are ordained of God. There seems to be God's going to allow a kind of a power shift here, and Nebuchadnezzar's going to lose his crown temporarily. But not only lose his crown temporarily on the world stage, you might see the powers that be are ordained of God, and this is going to favour his enemies. So Verse 23, and whereas the king saw a watcher, so here's the watcher again, and whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven and saying, hew the tree down and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass in the tender grass of the field. So, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field till 7 times pass over him. So this tree is going to be cut down, in other words. Now, often in the Bible, when it talks of a tree being cut down, it can simply be that the tree is cut down. A tree cut down, not necessarily cutting off the roots here as you read it. If the tree is cut down and the roots are cut down, well, that tree will be totally plucked up and would never grow again. So plucked up by the roots would mean that's it, you're over, you're finished, you're kind of, you're never going to grow again. But this tree was cut down, but not cut down at the roots. So the stump was left, which meant that Nebuchadnezzar would regain his kingdom. But first he was going to go into a form of a prison. Now, this form of a prison was going to come to him not in a prison cell, but as a strong delusion. Now, a strong delusion would clearly render a person insane, because this can take various levels of insanity to it. Well, the level of insanity that was going to fall upon Nebuchadnezzar was indeed going to be extreme. No doubt the punishment measuring the sin, in that the punishment was, of course, extreme. And the madness here, the delusion, you hear of a strong delusion in the last days. For this cause shall God send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned, which had pleasure in unrighteousness, and didn't have pleasure, did take pleasure in the truth. So Nebuchadnezzar here, not taking pleasure in the truth and didn't listen to the warning in the dream. In fact, a year had gone by. God gives people their warnings, and of course this might have an immediate effect upon a person, but time goes by and they have a way of forgetting the warnings. And so sometimes it's good to review these chapters and to remember the warnings. Maybe search your heart, search your mind, search your own life. Are there not, in many people's lives, manifestations of the same? Because sin being so great in so many people's lives, they might not talk about such things, because you then not only have to expose the sin, you'd have to expose the possibility that you have gone mad, in that you've been visited via an angel, what you might call a watcher, watching over you, that there was indeed an intervention here, an intervention there. So many don't talk about these interventions, but Nebuchadnezzar talking about these interventions and even exposing the sin in himself, that he was indeed oppressing the poor to become proud. So Daniel warns him, whereas verse 23, whereas the king saw a watcher and holy one coming down from heaven and saying, hew the tree down and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots, and so on. So the stump of the roots means he would regain his kingdom. He hadn't cut down to the roots. He'd cut down to the stump, meaning he would regain his kingdom again. 7 times would pass over, in other words, 7 years. So 7 years under a strong delusion. It doesn't always follow that if you go under a strong delusion, it's forever. Though with some people, they would be under strong delusions. This could go on even for in this life. And they would die in their sins and be under a strong delusion in the next life. So not going, a strong delusion could render a person under a strong delusion for the rest of his life. Jesus talked to the Pharisees and warned them that they would die in their sins. And so a lifetime of imprisonment to sin itself is bondage, is indeed imprisonment to sins. And many are imprisoned to their sins. They couldn't hear if they tried, they couldn't see if they tried, because God had blinded their eyes and deafened their ears and hardened their hearts. And they are indeed under a strong delusion. This strong delusion would be their prison. Now, if God's appeared to you and God's told you the truth of a certain matter or a certain sin in your life and you persist in that sin, then watch out. You could find yourself under a strong delusion. That could be your role in the cosmos, and that's what you've chosen. That's what you would do. That's what you are. That's what everyone will know you as. They will talk about so and such a person. They say, "Oh, him, he's full of wrath. Oh, him, he's part of the criminal classes. Oh, him, he's a drug addict. Oh, him, he's an alcoholic. Oh, him, he's always this, that, or whatever. He's a high-powered salesman, and he's always making money. Money's all he does." So you'll be imprisoned to your sin, in other words, that you might believe a lie, having been warned. So this is the interpretation, and this is the decree of the Most High, which is come upon my Lord the King, that they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven, and 7 times, in other words, 7 years shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. So God had given Nebuchadnezzar this great kingdom, and Nebuchadnezzar was becoming proud and taking all the glory and credit to himself, and was indeed oppressing the poor. And whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the roots, thy kingdom shall be sure unto thee, after that thou shalt have known that the heavens do rule. So in other words, Daniel's saying, you better watch out, you better listen, these watchers are watching over you. These watchers, God's cops, they've got you covered. They know everything you're doing. They know everything you're going to do. And this dream is a warning to you. And so he goes on, wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness. So clearly Nebuchadnezzar had fallen into sin. And thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. So maybe he become oppressive. As usual, what do these kings do? They rob and exploit the poor. So Daniel's warning him of his iniquities. You are becoming proud. You are becoming, you are exploiting and robbing and oppressing the poor. You need to stop all of this before it's too late, or you're going to go under a strong delusion. These God's cops in the spirit world, these watchers are going to indeed cut you down. They're going to come in this sense, in this vision, with God's axe, and they will cut this tree down. They will cut you down, and you will go under a strong delusion. Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. And don't forget, this is Nebuchadnezzar's testimony. All this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. Right, so you can picture him walking around in his palace, his head above the clouds. The king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and the honour of my majesty? While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, so you picture here's the watchers not appearing to him in a dream, but now these watchers kind of hovering over here. You picture them kind of hovering out there in the spirit world and watching all of this. And indeed, Nebuchadnezzar had put his foot in it and had become proud, was no doubt oppressing the poor. While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O king, now they're going to cross from that dimension into this dimension. And King Nebuchadnezzar, no doubt hearing a form of an audible voice here, an intervention across from the spirit world into this world, and crossing over, no doubt, a time of sin running rampant in this king's life. And who could know how much this was manifest in the affairs of his kingdom, in oppressing and robbing and exploiting the poor, as so often they do. So these watchers, not only watching over the kings, but even watching over the affairs of man and the peoples of many nations that are being oppressed by these oppressive kings. And so at times they intervene. While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee. And they shall, the dream, what did the dream say? And they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times, in other words, 7 years shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and did eat grass as oxen. So he's going under a strong delusion. He's a king that's going to go mad. And he was driven from men and did eat grass as oxen. And his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers. So not a pretty sight. Normally a king would be groomed and looked after, his hair comb and cut, and all of his hairs all groomed and made to look nice and smooth and what have you. But here's the king. He's a disgraceful sight. In other words, is the same hour as the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven. So he's kind of, you picture him here, he's gone completely mad, and he's running around on all fours, eating grass, and he's not a pretty sight. He doesn't even get up in the morning and dress. He runs around naked, eating grass. He's gone under a strong delusion. He's clearly gone mad. And I guess these days, when you look out the window, these computers here, this iPad here, I'm talking in so big a kind of a window to the world, and you read and you see so many people have gone insane now. They've gone completely over to some kind of insanity. It's not just madness anymore. We used to in the old days say it's a bit mad out there, isn't it? But now it's actually gone over to gross insanity. So many now have gone mad, gone under what you might call the same kind of strong delusion. So you could say, well, if God's warning you, if any way at all, this story, let's say, take everything out of it, what I've said, and simply go with the chapter itself. It's in Daniel chapter 4. It's Nebuchadnezzar's own testimony. And read what happened to him. This is Nebuchadnezzar, a great king, and he's written this for many, many peoples and many, many nations to read, and so they have. No doubt this testimony of Nebuchadnezzar has been read by no doubt millions, if not billions of people since they were written all those years ago. So quite a powerful testimony coming from a very powerful king. And this king going under a strong delusion. If they receive not the love of the truth, because they receive not the love of the truth, wherefore hath God sent them strong delusion that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned that have pleasure in unrighteousness. So how long will a person go under a strong delusion? Fortunately for Nebuchadnezzar here, the tree was cut down and the stump was left, and he would regain his sanity and would be restored to his kingdom after 7 times, being 7 years. But the danger is, when Jesus talked to the Pharisees when he was here, he warned them that they would die in their sins, that their eyes have been blinded and their ears hardened, and they're deafened and they're hardened, and they no longer could they hear God's voice, even if they tried. And so it says, let him that have ears to hear, let him hear. He that have eyes to see, let him see. He that have a heart to receive, let him receive. But if you have eyes to see and you have ears to hear and a heart to open that you can receive, then if you reject God's voice talking to you through whatever manifestation he chooses to use, be it chapter or person or angel or even watcher coming to you, then if you don't listen, then you will go under a strong delusion. You might go under a strong delusion for your rest of your days on earth. You might die in your sins and therefore wake up in your sins in the next life and still be under a strong delusion there for hundreds of years. So this is quite a warning of strong delusions. And fortunately for Nebuchadnezzar, he was going under a strong delusion for 7 times 7 years. And at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, so 7 times the past 7 years, and mine understanding, and mine understanding returned unto me. So clearly he'd gone mad, because his understanding returned unto him. He was under a strong delusion. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honoured him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven. The army of heaven, all these angels and these watchers, God's cops watching over the affairs of men and often intervening when the sin starts running rampant. So watch out if the sin starts running rampant in you and God visits you via one of the watchers, then we should listen. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand, or say unto him, What doest thou? As at that same time my reason, so clearly gone mad, my reason returned unto me, and for the glory of my kingdom mine honour and brightness returned unto me, and my counsellors and my lords sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honour the King of heaven, all whose works are true, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase. So praise Jesus.